My name is Rebecca Martinez Fitzgerald. I'm an EFT therapist in Durham, North Carolina. Today, I am talking to Jen Moynihan Wynn. Jen, hi, will you introduce yourself?
Hey, yeah, I'm Jen. I use she, her pronouns. I am an LMFT certified Gottman therapist and certified emotionally focused therapist. And I practice out of Raleigh, North Carolina, working primarily with couples.
Awesome. Now, one of the things I was hoping to talk to you today is about your work with couples who are practicing consensual non-monogamy. And so I wanted to ask, what's the difference between consensual non-monogamy and polyamory, and why does that matter?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because they're slightly different, but they are very related. Consensual non-monogamy is the umbrella term for lots of different variations of ways that people might see other relationships outside of your traditional monogamous relationship. Polyamory is kind of a term that is often nestled underneath the umbrella of consensual non-monogamy. I think one of the most important things, though, is that people have different words and different meanings for the different kind of labels that they put on their relationships. So if you ever are working with someone who says that they have a relationship structure that's a certain way, I always like to just ask, like, what does that mean for them? Because they have lots of different ways that you can identify yourself.
Mhm. So somebody might refer to themselves as polyamorous, but there might be nuances there that may look different from somebody else's experience of polyamory.
Yeah, because there's lots of different kinds of relationships that can fall under the consensual non-monogamy umbrella, like swinging, open marriage, polyfidelity, polycule, like polyamory. So there's a lot of different language elements, but it can mean different things to different people. So it's always good to just ask when someone comes to you and says that they're in a poly relationship, like, what does that look like? What does that mean for them?
Cool. What I understand to be one of the core elements of consensual non-monogamy is that everyone who is in that arrangement is aware that it's a non-monogamous relationship, and then they make agreements
Yes.
about how things are supposed to work.
Yes, that's the biggest part of it, is that it's consensual and everyone is aware and kind of knows about each other. So that it really does enhance a lot of communication, and hopefully trust is the idea behind it, because you really have to work really hard to kind of build trust and communicate pretty regularly and pretty clearly about what you're needing, what you're feeling, things like that.
Yeah, some people that I've spoken to, even clients, have said, lots of people think that it involves lots of romance, lots of sex, but really
Yeah.
it's a lot of scheduling and a lot of emotional
Yes.
validation.
Yes. And I'm really, really glad you brought that up, because it's not always about sex. Like, lots of asexual people also go into non-monogamous arrangements. So it's not always just about sex or even romance. It's just being able to, recognize that you might not always be able to get 100% of your needs fulfilled by one person, and really being able to just create lots of different kinds of secure attachments with people.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So how do you approach therapy with couples who are polyamorous or practicing consensual non-monogamy?
Yeah. Well, I always like to, just like I said in the beginning, kind of ask what it means for them. And I think one thing I would like to throw out there before I share a little bit more is that, like, I'm by no means an expert, but the thing is, like, you don't really need to be an expert. Like, you just have to kind of be open and willing to learn. And so I wanted to share like a couple of resources that have been like super helpful for me on like my journey as I've been like learning about this community. One is a podcast called Multi-Amory, which is really good for all kinds of relationships. They do talk a lot about different types of ethical non-monogamous type arrangements, but it's also just really good relationship advice for all kinds of relationships. And a couple of books that I like really swear by is Polysecure by Jessica Fern. I think this is an
Good one.
amazing book,
Mhm.
yes, for helping us talk about creating secure attachment, because that's really just the goal when we're working with either monogamous couples or non-monogamous couples. And like, you can have more than one secure attachment. Like I have a secure attachment with my husband, but I also have a secure attachment with my best friend and mentors and my therapist. And so this book really helps solidify that you actually can have secure relationships with more than one person and how to do it. So this is an awesome book. And another one that I really like is called Polyamory. And this, it's a clinical toolkit for therapists and their clients. And this is by Martha Kauppi. This book does take a little bit more of a CBT type approach to it, but this is such a great resource for, there's a question that people often ask about like who should be included in your therapeutic arrangement. And this book does a really good job of helping you decide who should you include when you're doing therapy with people, kind of common pitfalls, like things that you can assess for. If it's not a problem with polyamory, like what are other problems that could face? Like this is such a wealth of information and has lots of good resources for therapists in there. So I love this book. And another one that I really like is this jealousy workbook. And this one is specifically for people who are in consensual non-monogamy relationships. It helps people kind of determine, is non-monogamy right for me? And what is my kind of orientation, and how do I work with jealousy and all of the flavors of jealousy that like come up, like anger and sadness and hurt, and what to do with those feelings and how to talk about them. So these are all super helpful resources that I've had just in my journey working with consensual non-monogamy folks. And so that I think how you can approach it is just really very client-centered. Like I said, I like to know from the very beginning, like what does ethical non-monogamy mean for them? Like who are key people in their life? I like to do like a relationship map, things like that, and just figure out like what are they wanting in terms of like secure attachment with their partners.
Awesome. And I'm so glad that you brought up that jealousy workbook and jealousy in general, because EFT emphasizes trust, to create and uphold secure attachment between partners. So how can this happen when partners have other sexual or romantic relationships?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because like people who are in poly relationships definitely get jealous. Like it's not something that they are like immune to, but also people in monogamous relationships get jealous. So it's really like you would work with it kind of the same, particularly from an EFT perspective. You would work at it like just like any other emotion that comes up, where you figure out where does it show up in your body. How does it affect your view of self, your view of other? What do you end up doing with the jealousy? How is it impacting your bond? We just really give jealousy a place that we can actually talk about it and hopefully create secure attachment, because we can talk about hard things. Like you can reach out to your partner and say, I'm feeling scared that you're spending a lot of time with this person and I need support. Like that's what we're trying to do in monogamous relationships too, when people are feeling overwhelmed or scared or jealous. So it's really not that different from non-monogamy as we would be working with it with a monogamous relationship. And kind of like I was saying earlier, like you can create secure attachments with more than one person. Really, we're just trying to help people answer the questions like, can I count on you? Are you responsive to me? Are you accessible? Are you there for me? And just because they're often with other people doesn't necessarily mean that they can't also be that way with us. And I think a lot of the secure attachment and particularly non-monogamy literature out there, they emphasize a really nice kind of secure attachment with yourself in addition to secure attachment with your partners. So it's kind of like an interdependency, which is like really the goal that we're working for anyway in monogamy.
Mm-hmm. That's really beautifully put. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, what do you want other EFT therapists to know about or think about when working with polyamorous partnerships or consensually non-monogamous couples?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this question a lot, like, because I think there's a lot that I would like to share here. So trying to make it as succinct as possible. I think I would like to reflect on what I was saying earlier, and that like you really don't have to be an expert in non-monogamy to be able to work with non-monogamous clients. You really just have to have a willingness to learn and openness, and like a willingness to maybe challenge some internal bias. And that can be really challenging. And I think it's also really important because it is like a cultural competency. Like a lot of people that participate in the non-monogamy community have shared that this isn't necessarily a lifestyle choice. For some it is, but for some it's also like a part of who they are. Like it's a part of their orientation to sex and relationships, not unlike gender and sexual orientation. And so I think that's a really important piece to learn, because I think some well-meaning therapists might suggest that people like, hey, if non-monogamy isn't working, like maybe you should try monogamy. But like we wouldn't say that to somebody who is like gay and say like, hey, why don't you just try being straight? And so I think that's really important to remember, that for some, this feels like a big part of who they are and a big part of their orientation. And that there's a lot of intersecting identities associated with this. So, there's a lot of kind of cultural competency that it's good to be aware of, because someone who the LGBT community tends to really overlap a lot with the polyamorous community, and it also tends to overlap a lot with like the neurodiverse community, and tends to overlap a lot with like the geek community. And so there's a lot of potentially marginalized identities that your clients can have. And so it's just important to know like the intersectionality of it. And then lastly, I just think this is a generalization, but in my experience, working with people in non-monogamous relationships, like they really love relationships and they want their relationships to work. And so they're like super motivated, they're super engaged in therapy, and sometimes to find a therapist who's willing to work with non-monogamy. So the people that, if you are willing to work with them, that can be like such a rich relationship, because there's a lot of like gratitude and excitement about just like someone willing to like work with them. And they're like really engaged, and it can just be like a really nice and rich therapeutic relationship in my experience.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. I find that folks who have come to couples therapy, who are practicing consensual non-monogamy, tend to be so conscientious in their approach to that
Yeah.
relationship, the therapeutic relationship, and to taking a really considerate approach to engaging with other partners.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jen. It was great talking to
Yeah. It
you.
was so great talking to you too. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always fun to talk about relationships.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you, you too.